Hey, fourth graders, Miss Seals here. Very excited about our very first science lab of the new school year. Of course, it looks a little bit different right now because you're not actually in the classroom. So for these first couple weeks when you're learning from home, you'll be seeing videos like this. I'll be doing a demo or an experiment, and you will be entering your hypothesis and your observations on Schoology. Okay, and then once we come back to school in a couple weeks, you'll be getting to come into the science lab like usual and doing your experiment in here. All right, so today what we are talking about in here is science safety. So your target says, I can demonstrate safe practices and the use of safety equipment, including safety goggles. So one way that scientists stay safe during an experiment or an investigation is by using safety goggles to protect their eyes. I'm going to be using safety goggles here in a couple minutes. If you were in the science lab doing this experiment with me, you would also be putting on safety goggles. I don't need to put them on just yet, but I will shortly. Before we start the experiment, I want to quickly talk about something called the scientific process. All right, and the scientific process is a list of steps that scientists follow whenever they are doing an experiment or an investigation. And every scientific experiment or investigation starts with asking a question. This gives you the purpose or the reasoning for your experiment, or tells you what you're trying to find out in your experiment. Step 2 is to create a hypothesis, and this is when a scientist makes a prediction or an educated guess about what they think is going to happen in the experiment. And we'll talk more about that in a minute because you're going to be making a hypothesis today. Step 3 is to do your experiment. Step 4 is to collect your data, and that's when you take everything that you found out in your experiment and you compile it maybe into a chart, a graph, a table, some way to organize it all so that you can look and use the data to then create your conclusion, which is where you write and talk about what you learned from the experiment, or in other words, what is the data telling you about the experiment? Okay, so whenever we do an experiment or an investigation, we will be following these steps. So I told you today that you are going to be creating a hypothesis. So I want to quickly talk a little bit more about that. This is a prediction or an educated guess about what you think will happen in an experiment. Notice I put the words educated guess. It's not just a random guess. Okay, sometimes you hear it maybe called a reasonable guess. You take your background knowledge, you take things that you've already learned or seen, or maybe other experiments you've done before, and you use those things to then create your hypothesis. Is it okay if your hypothesis is wrong or incorrect? Absolutely, because it's just a guess. You're not a fortune teller. You can't predict the future. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. However, if your hypothesis is incorrect, hopefully that leads you to think about why the experiment turned out to be a different way than you originally thought. That's how we learn, all right? So I'm going to explain the experiment that I'm going to be showing you today, and then I'm going to pause, or you're going to pause, and make your hypothesis. So for this experiment, our question, remember in our scientific method, we always start with a question. Our question is, do Skittles dissolve faster in hot water or cold water? All right, so I want to talk about that word dissolve very quickly. Dissolve is not the same as melt. Dissolve does not mean disappear. Dissolve means to break down into small pieces and completely and evenly distribute in the water. An example where you've probably seen dissolving before is when you are creating or making Kool-Aid. You take your water, you take your powder, you pour the powder in, you stir it up, and after a couple seconds of stirring, the Kool-Aid dissolves. It doesn't disappear, it doesn't go away. We know it's there because we can see it, we can smell it, we can even taste it. Okay, but it has dissolved. It has broken up into tiny, tiny pieces and completely mixed in with the water and evenly mixed in with the water. So we're finding out if a Skittle dissolves faster in hot water or cold water. So the way it will work is in just a minute, I'll place my hot and cold water here so that you will be able to see it. All right, and I'm going to move my screen so it'll look like this when we're ready to start the experiment. And then when it's time, I'll say go. I'll drop the Skittles in the hot water and cold water, and then I'm going to set my stopwatch and time it so we can find out which one dissolves faster. Now, so when you see, the way that you're going to know a Skittle is starting to dissolve is you might see the water start to change color. It might change the same color as the Skittle. You might see pieces of the Skittle breaking up and floating towards the top. You might see the Skittle itself getting smaller and smaller and smaller because pieces are dissolving off of it. Those are all indications that the Skittle is dissolving. Make sure you are watching very, very carefully, because at the end of the experiment, you're going to go back to Schoology and you are going to create or you're going to write your observations, 3 sentences about what you noticed in the experiment. Okay, so before we start, you are going to pause this video. You're going to go back into Schoology where you found this video, and there is an area for a discussion post. And I want you to do 2 things on that discussion post. Number 1, I want you to make a hypothesis. So that's where you're going to tell me what you think is going to happen. So you can either say, remember, our question that we're asking is, do Skittles dissolve faster in hot water or cold water? So you can say, I think the Skittle will dissolve faster in cold water because, and then you need to explain why, because you're 4th graders. You need to be writing out and thinking about your reasoning, okay? Or you can say, I think the Skittle will dissolve faster in hot water because, and then again, explain your thinking. So the first thing you're doing is creating your own hypothesis. The second thing you're doing is you are responding to a classmate's hypothesis. So I need you to make sure that your responses are respectful and appropriate and that they are on topic. You could say things like, I agree with you because, or I wonder if, or I agree with your thinking. Okay, you could even say that you disagree because, but make sure it's respectful and appropriate. Do we all understand that? All right, so here's your chance. I want you to pause this video, go back into Schoology, make your hypothesis in that discussion post and respond to a classmate's hypothesis. When you're finished with that, come back into this video, press play, and we will do the experiment. All right, I'll see you in a second. All right, welcome back. So I am putting on my goggles because we are practicing being safe in the science lab using safety equipment such as goggles. So I have my goggles on. I'm going to keep them on for this whole experiment. The reason I'm wearing goggles is because I do not want to get hot water in my eye. All right, that wouldn't feel good. I really don't even want to get this cold water in my eye because who knows if it's even clean. All right, we don't want stuff in our eyes. So I'm going to wear goggles. All right, here are the cards. This is going to tell you this is the hot water, this is the cold water. So here's the cold water. I just took it out of the refrigerator not too long ago. I'm getting my stopwatch ready. And then this is going to be the warm water. It was heated up. It's not super duper hot, but it's definitely warm. And I'm making sure I have the same amount of both hot water and cold water. This is because whenever you do an experiment, you can only have one variable. A variable is what changes in an experiment, all right? So in this experiment, we're using the same amount of water. We're even going to be using the same color of Skittle. The only thing that's changing, our only variable in this experiment, is the temperature of the water. We have hot water, we have cold water. The reason why you can only have one variable when you do an experiment is so that your results are reliable. What I mean by that is if we do this experiment and we find out, let's say that the Skittle in the cold water dissolved faster, but maybe we had a blue Skittle and a red Skittle, that's another variable. We don't know if the cold water really does dissolve the Skittle faster, or maybe if just blue Skittles dissolve faster. We don't know because we have two variables. That's why you can only have one. So our variable in this experiment is the temperature of the water. All right. So please make sure you are watching. Please make sure you are paying attention, because remember, at the end of this, you are going to be writing 3 sentences about what you observe and what you notice. Also, my goggles are still on. All right, here we go. I am going to drop them in and starting my timer. Move it a little bit closer so you can see. Ooh, I see something already happening. I'll hold this up so you can see. I noticed some of the color is already starting to come off of the Skittle, and it is turning the water red. I also see little pieces of the Skittle starting to kind of break off. Okay, there's the hot water. Ooh, here's the cold water. I see some of the color coming off there as well. Moving it a little bit closer so you can see. My goggles are still on. I'm being very safe. Wow, look at this one. It's already, all the color is completely off of the Skittle. So we just have a white Skittle now. All the colors dissolved into the water. The cold one still has some color left on it. It's not completely white yet. So we're at about 1 minute and 36 seconds. We're going to keep going a little bit longer. I'm not sure if either of them will actually dissolve all the way, but we could stop the timer. We'll maybe stop it at about 3 minutes and then just see which one has dissolved the most. Here's the hot one. There is no color left on the Skittle. Oh, you can see pieces of it breaking off. It is definitely getting smaller and dissolving. There's a little bit of color left on the cold one. Not much. It seems to still have its original size and shape. All right, we'll go about 20 more seconds. Make sure you're watching and noticing. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop. Okay, so it may be difficult for you to see, so I'm gonna hold these up and talk about them. Let's see if I can turn it. All right, there you go. So there is the Skittle that was in the hot water. You can see all of the color has dissolved off of it. The Skittle has gotten smaller. It's changed shape. It's kind of lumpier. And you can see some pieces of it breaking off and floating up. Okay. Ooh, it's gotten a lot smaller. Here is the Skittle in the cold water. It also has lost all of its color. It's completely white and the color has dissolved into the water. However, this Skittle it appears to be almost the same size as it was when I put the Skittle in here. It hasn't really changed size and shape much, which means it has not dissolved as much as the one in the hot water. So I'm going to hold them up for you side by side. Okay, so the one in the hot water is a lot smaller. The one in the cold water is pretty much the same size. So what does that mean? Which one has dissolved the fastest? Okay, Before I continue, I want to tell you that we'd never go back and change our hypothesis. If your hypothesis was incorrect, it is okay. It's not for a grade. We just want to hear your thinking and your reasoning when you make your hypothesis, okay? So what you're going to do is, when this video ends, oh, I'm going to keep my goggles on because I still have my materials out. When this video ends in just a minute, you are going to go back into Schoology. There is a short answer assessment for you, and it asks you to write 3 complete sentences about what you observed in this experiment. So you're going to tell me which one dissolved faster, the one in the hot water or the cold water. You are going to tell me something that you noticed. What did you see happening? Did you see the water change color? Did it change color quickly? Did it change color slowly? Did you see pieces breaking off? Did the Skittle change size? Did the Skittles change shape? What are some other things that you observed during this experiment? Okay, I would like 3 complete sentences or more. If you want to write more than 3, be my guest. All right, I hope that you guys had fun. I hope that you are excited about Science Lab. I hope that we get to come back to school very soon so you can start coming into the lab and doing these lessons with me. I miss you guys. I hope you're doing well, and I will see you soon. Thanks, bye-bye.